Are you ready?
Hello, and welcome to the Whole House Podcast, where we promise to bring you home, health, and family all in one place. We're a blog team trying our hand at podcasting, and we like to compare our different purposes and giftings and strengths to the rooms in a house. Together, we make up the whole house. So grab a cup of coffee and join our overly caffeinated team here for the Whole House Podcast.
Hi, welcome to the Whole House Podcast. Carly, our usual host, is not here today because she's really busy this week with the startup of a branch of a church. So she's been busy with that, so we're giving her the day off from this. And this is Kathleen and...
This is Lori.
And today we're going to be talking about the 6 risk factors that make a child from a hard place. And on the Whole House, on the webpage, and also on the podcast, we use that phrase a lot, a child from a hard place. So we thought we would do a whole podcast on explaining what that meant and talking through the 6 risk factors. And I hear these things from parents a lot. I didn't think it would be this hard.
Yeah.
My child's behaviors are out of control. He got kicked off the school bus again. I've heard that one quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
He keeps punching kids in line. Our whole house is like a war zone. I thought I could do this, but I don't think I can. It's just too hard. So I've heard these statements from parents and also...
I think I've said these statements.
Yeah, Lori has said some of these things to me. I've said a lot of these things myself. I think all of those, except the school bus thing, since I homeschooled. But I just want to say, backtrack here for a second. Whenever we're to that stress level, whenever we're to that point where we don't think we can handle it, those are the point that we need some self-care.
Yes.
But when you're not in the middle of that, that's when we can educate ourselves and find some solutions and find some new parenting tools. It's very difficult to do that in the middle of all of that stress. So, and a lot of parents say, he can be so manipulative. I think he's doing this on purpose. And some parents that I've offered to come into their home and do some observation will say, well, no, they'll just pull the wool over your eyes and you won't see what they're doing. But which is not true because I have 7 children.
Right, you've been there.
Yeah. I don't think there's any wool that you can pull over my eyes. And it's funny because my youngest, I have 4 boys and 3 girls, but my youngest is a boy, and he used to get so irritated with me. This is just a little sidebar because he couldn't scare me. He would hide behind a door, hide in a closet, and jump out, and I would just walk by and go, oh, like, Mom, why are you scared? It's
my
like,
boys do that too.
I've had too many boys before you, and it's not going to work. So I just want to tell you, you're not alone.
No. That's the number one thing that people think is that they're alone.
Right,
and they're so much harder.
Right, and they're afraid to step forward and say, here's what I'm dealing with, this is what I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
Because they think they're the only person who's struggling with it, and it's not true. You're not alone. We're there with you. Your situation is not unique. And if you think it's unique, maybe you talk to 5 people and they say, we don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Then keep reaching out because there's somebody out there who is in the same boat you are.
Right.
And I've probably in every boat, so you can reach out to me.
You probably have been.
I have one friend who's reached out to me who has 4 children, and she's reached out to me for each child, and every single time I say, oh yeah, my child, this child did that, and that child did that, and she said, I think that you have a child who has done everything, and or had every syndrome or whatever, and I said, yep, pretty much.
Probably, yep.
So.
Okay, so what is a child from a hard place? I don't think you covered that.
No. I'll go right into that after I say one more thing. I will just say that we have to remember that every behavior is a need.
Yes.
And it might not be expressed appropriately, but it is a need. And if we can remember that, and I'm telling you, it is very difficult to remember that in the moment.
It's very hard.
But if you can start getting that thought process in your mind that, you know, if the child is on the floor crying, if the child can't regulate, those sorts of things, there's a need under there, and you have to figure out what the need is. It may be as simple as the child is hungry and thirsty.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell a story about that, about one of Lori's, her son, JR, who has sensory processing disorder. I have a swim day in the summer once a week because I have a pool. And so I just invite moms and their kids, and one particular day, JR seemed to be out of control. He couldn't keep his hands off of the other kids, and he was just couldn't regulate himself.
Yeah.
So
he was just out of sorts. He wasn't
right. So I said to him, JR, you need to go make a sandwich. So he did. He went inside and he made himself a peanut butter sandwich, and he was better.
Yeah. Well, now whenever I try to make a snack to bring to swim day, he's like, "No, I'll have a peanut butter sandwich at
That's
Kathleen's."
right. Kathleen said I needed to make a sandwich at her house, and that happened the very next week. He was like, "Oh, we don't need to pack a lunch. Kathleen's going to tell me to make a sandwich." Okay, so I'll get into the phrase children from hard places. And we use this a lot in adoption and foster circles. As Ryan North, the executive director of Tapestry Ministry, reminds us, this is not a geographical location. So we're not talking about a place on the map. And as explained in The Connected Child, that's by Dr. Karen Purvis, and I'll make sure I link all these things. There are 6 primary risk factors that characterize children from hard places. The first one is prenatal stress and harm. Over 80% of children adopted or in foster care have been exposed to drugs and alcohol. And here's something really interesting. During a stressful pregnancy, just kind of put this picture in your mind. Let's say there's a young mom, she's pregnant, and she's trying to make that difficult decision. Is she going to keep the child? Is she going to put the child up for adoption? Maybe she's not in the best home environment, so her stress levels are high. Yeah. And she can't decide what she's going to do with this child, but the cortisol level actually crosses the placenta, which means the cortisol level goes to the baby.
Yeah.
And an interesting kind of scientific study, they took the cortisol levels of a pregnant mom who was very stressed, and then 6 months after the infant was born, they tested the infant's cortisol levels, and they were just as high as his mother's were during that pregnancy.
Yeah.
So that's prenatal stress and harm. And Lori,
I don't think a lot of people realize how much your state of being while you are pregnant affects your child.
right?
Like, I didn't realize that. I didn't know that. Which honestly, it explains a lot of, certain behaviors that you notice after the child is born.
Right.
If you really pay attention to what was going on with the mother during the pregnancy, how was her stress levels, what kind of home situation was she in. It explains a lot of the behaviors that you can see in the baby afterwards. I'm glad they made that connection, because it's really something you got to think about.
Right, and part of the reason that the connection wasn't made earlier is because in our present culture, where we're told that a child in utero isn't really a child, if you believe that, then why would you think about what you're doing while you're pregnant with that child? But the truth is, science keeps proving over and over again that that is already a human being from conception, And everything you do from the point of conception affects that child.
Yep.
And it affects certain things about him. For instance, I'll just say a little bit about my own past. When my sister and I are only 11 months apart, so I was a little bit of a stressful pregnancy for my mother. In fact, the doctor had told my mother, when you get home, just go walk around a little bit when she found out she was pregnant, and you'll lose this one and you can have more. Well,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
You've told me that before, but every time that you say that story, I'm like, what?
Right. So I might have been a little bit of a stressful pregnancy. And I was born a month early, but I'm here. So that's number 1, prenatal stress and harm. Number 2 is a difficult labor or birth. And I'm going to give you an example of some twins. One twin, so mom went into labor and one twin was born at home. And the other one she was having some issues with. So they put her in the back of a truck and drove her to a hospital. After a 45-minute ride to the hospital, twin number 2 was born.
Whew.
So guess who had the developmental delays? Guess who had the academic delays? It was twin number 2, because that was a stressful birth for that twin. So sometimes we don't think about that either, the difficult labor or birth. We just think, okay, the child's been born, he's okay, we did it, we made it. So
I mean, you get a connection with your mother when you're born. That's why, skin to skin right afterwards is so popular anymore. They found that is beneficial to the baby. So if you're having a difficult labor and delivery and your baby has to be rushed right to the NICU because of things that happen that you don't have any control over. It's not like you did anything, but this baby needs help right away. They miss that. So then you're going to have to work a little bit more than, say, your baby was handed right to you.
Right, you'll have some catching up to do.
Yeah.
Right. So, number 3 is early medical trauma, which is what Lori is talking about. So that was a good lead-in. Oftentimes when a baby is born, they have to be rushed away, and they maybe have an extended hospital stay, like my youngest did, and that's trauma.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we say about my youngest is his first touch was pain. His first touch wasn't love, it was pain. It was needles. It was trying to keep this child alive and trying to feed him because he couldn't eat, because he had a cleft palate. And those things are, praise God, we have doctors and nurses who can do those things and keep the child alive. But then on the other hand, we have to remember that is a trauma to the child that we're going to have to spend some time connecting and making up for. And especially if you bring a child home through foster care or adoption and they've had all 3 of these so far, and maybe even all 6 that we go through, we have to remember that we're going to have to backtrack and fill in those spaces that they missed.
Yeah, which is a hard thing to do when you say your child is 13 and you're having to deal with behaviors that seem like he should be outgrown.
Right. Right, and it's very tempting when you've adopted an older child. The oldest child that we adopted, he was 7 at the time, so I definitely couldn't hold him on my lap and feed him a bottle because he wouldn't have liked that at all. But there were
that would have been interesting to see.
But there were things that we couldn't expect of him for his emotional age to be his physical age, because usually when you bring a child from a hard place home, they're half their physical age emotionally.
Yeah.
So an 8-year-old would be like a 4-year-old emotionally, and we have to remember that. So number 4 is the one that we always expect. It's trauma, like a house fire or a natural disaster or a car accident or the death of a parent. Those are trauma. When we look at a child who's been through that, we think, oh my goodness, that child has been through some trauma. And one of the kids that used to belong to our homeschool co-op, he was in a school bus accident. And he went through a period where he was afraid to get in a car, period. So that's natural. That's normal. We're thinking, okay, that kid went through some trauma in a vehicle. He doesn't want to get in a vehicle. And they very slowly had to work him back into getting into a vehicle. And so those are the kind of things that we expect. And number 5 and 6 are the ones that we really expect. Maybe not number 5 as much, but neglect. Because neglect says to a child, you don't exist.
Yeah, and that's so sad.
Right. Like, you just don't exist. And I've heard so many stories, and I can't go into, I'll be very general about them because they're somebody else's stories, but in case this is a story that your child has, I've heard of children being locked in the basement when they get home from school and not being allowed out. And I've heard of children who were not allowed to sit at the dinner table with the rest of the family because it was a new marriage, new dad. He didn't want to have anything to do with the old kids. So those are neglect. Those say you don't exist.
That almost makes me want to cry.
Yeah, it makes
So
me want to
sad.
cry. But that just plays havoc with the child's brain and body and development, because they begin to believe these things. And when they believe that they don't exist, they're going to make sure that you notice they exist, which means they're going to act out.
Yeah.
And number 6 is abuse. And abuse says you don't matter. And that's horrible, because especially when you have abuse and neglect and you go through that cycle of being ignored and not fed and then being abused. So when our children come to us, these 6 risk factors make a child from a hard place.
Yes.
And they can have 1 or 2 of them, or 3 of them, or 4 of them, or some children, like several of my children, had all of them, all 6 of them.
Yeah.
And so when we're parenting these children, we have to remember these risk factors that make a child from a hard place, and we have to approach this with understanding.
Yeah.
And Lori, you wanted to add something, that it's not just children that come through foster care or adoption.
No, not at all. It can, which I think we're going to talk about the Empowered to Connect training here in a little bit, but something that I love from that training is that you have these capital T traumas that you expect, that the big things that you constantly hear about, and then you have the lowercase t traumas, which she describes as death by paper cuts. Little things that you don't expect to be traumatic,
Right.
but they are.
Mm-hmm.
I think that my husband works out of town, and that was traumatic for our middle child. And
Right.
so I think that part of his sensory processing disorder and his behaviors that he has comes from that. It's not something that was majorly traumatic to the point of that you would think.
Right.
But it made a difference on him.
Right, it
So
impacts him.
It impacted him. Yeah.
Right,
in that
and
way.
we can think whatever we want to think about it, because you can think, well, wait, her husband comes home on the weekends, he has a great job, he provides for them.
Yeah, and
But
he
the
does
way
all
that the
those
child,
things.
right, and he does do all those things, but the way that the child's body processes it is not up to us.
No, it's not.
We don't get to control that. So we don't get to say, okay, listen, kid, you don't have it that bad, even
Right.
though we're tempted to say that, especially if the generation before that, our parents were raised like that, and they're just like, straighten up.
Yeah.
You need to just suck it up, and we
Suck
can't.
it up. We did the same thing. You'll be all right.
We walked 8 miles to school uphill both ways, so
In
you
5 foot of snow.
Right. Right. So we can't control how these things are going to affect our child.
Right.
And some of the little T traumas after big T traumas can be as simple as, for instance, my kids belong to a Ski for Life program. And if the ski day was canceled, that was a trauma.
Yeah.
That was a fall down on the floor,
Yep.
cry, scream, not be able to focus for the rest of the day trauma. So when they've had some of the big T traumas in their life, like these 6 risk factors that we talked about, then
The smaller things.
become bigger things.
Yeah. It's also a reason I don't tell my son plans until we're actually going to them.
Right. And that also depends on the child, because
Yeah.
some children, they want to know, they have to know
Right.
everything, and then other children are fine with being told at the last minute.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go through real quickly the 5 things that are impacted by early trauma. Any one of the 6 risk factors. So these are the 5 things that are impacted. The brain. So you get altered brain development, an overactive amygdala. It's as if the child is chased by a bear all the time. And
That
here's
would be a horrible feeling.
Yes, it is a horrible feeling. Our experiences shape the connections in our brain. And it's the Hebbian principle. What fires together wires together. So let me just break it down into something really simple about our experiences shape the connections in our brain. Okay, let's say, just real simple for a mom. This is mom level thinking here. Every morning the first thing that we do is go make coffee. And we know that every day when we go downstairs, the coffee maker will be there. There will be coffee if we went to the grocery store. And there's water, and we can make our coffee. So that experience over and over, every morning making that coffee, that forms a neural pathway in our brain. We don't doubt it, we don't think about it, we don't think, oh my gosh, the coffee maker may have disappeared overnight. Even if we bought the coffee, it might not be gone, you know, it might not be there, it might be gone. No, we know that coffee's going to be there, that coffee maker's there. Well, with a child from a hard place, if their experience is one day they get breakfast, the next day they don't get breakfast, one day they do something and mom and dad are mad because they did that thing, and the next day it's okay to do that thing. You see, those experiences make those connections and form neural pathways. And when your experience every day for the same event is different, then you get these splayed pathways. They're going all different directions, and the child doesn't know what to expect.
So they pretty much panic.
Right, so they're in overdrive all the time. That bear is chasing them. They don't know what to expect. They don't know what kind of reaction. You know, going back to the coffee maker, they don't know if the coffee maker is going to be there or not. So,
It's a scary place to be. It's
right.
a scary place to live.
Very scary place to live. And we will definitely go into these more on other podcasts. I'm just trying to get through this quickly so that you understand every time we say a child from a hard place, you'll know what we're talking about. Another thing that's affected is biology. The neurochemistry is altered. Hormones are altered. Serotonin is often low. Dopamine is either too low or too high. And one young girl that was tested, I think she was 5 years old, she had the adrenals of a 90-year-old.
Wow.
So they were just worn out from what we were talking about in this other example. Just constantly, brain was, a bear is chasing me, a bear is chasing me.
High alert.
High alert, constantly. And you can see these things in kids. You can see the signs. Maybe their shoulders tighten, their fists tighten. They're constantly looking around. They're constantly checking behind them to see what's behind them. Rebecca's behind me right now, under a table.
Cleaning your floor with her clothing.
Yeah, I told her she could dust with her clothing. Okay, so the third thing that's affected is the body. This is where we see learning delays, developmental delays, sensory issues.
Yep.
I'll let Lori talk about sensory issues here for a sec, what that means.
Yeah, so it's kind of sensory. The sensors are that's a complex subject because it's not all cut and dry. Everything is the same for every child.
Right, it's different for every child.
Yeah, it really depends, and a child can be either oversensitive to, and it's not just your 5 senses that you're taught in school. It's way more than that.
Right.
But you can either be oversensitive to things, or you can be responsive and undersensitive to things, or your child can be a mix of both of the things. I know that sometimes my son, I can touch him and he doesn't even feel me if he's not paying attention and looking.
Mm-hmm.
And then other times, someone can barely brush his back and he swings around with a fist like he's been shoved and he's ready to fight. It's just, it
Right.
depends on the child. It depends on...
Well, and it depends on their risk factors and their experience. Because, for example, if you adopt a child who's been in an orphanage with very little touch,
Yeah.
then they're definitely going to have some sensory issues, and they're going to have to sort those out. Because if the only, like my youngest, his first touch was always, medical help trying to keep him alive.
So he was afraid.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I could touch him, and it got worse as he got older because his arms were longer levers. If I accidentally touched him on the shoulder, I could get punched in the nose it was involuntary on his part. So,
It's just a reaction.
and I guess I was a slow learner because it'd be like, Raphael, and boom!
Yeah.
Okay. Beliefs. I think this is one that often people forget about. So I'm just going to ask you a question and let you think about it for a minute. What's one firmly held belief that you have? And what would it take for you to change that belief?
I think you've asked me this before.
Yes, I have. Do you have an answer?
I do. We talked about the importance of life from conception. That's one of my firmly held beliefs. Like, that conception happens, that's a baby. Period.
Right. Period. No exceptions. That is a baby.
That's my belief.
Mm-hmm.
And it would take, I don't know if anyone could convince me otherwise, in all honesty.
I just think of those sci-fi shows where they put you in a room and they put that visor thing on you and they show you images.
Yeah.
It's like, would it take that, or would that even do it?
Yeah.
I think of
Like
1984. Big Brother's watching you and he's going to brainwash you.
Yeah, all those
Like, would it take that
dystopian
much?
novels that
Right.
you read, right?
The Giver. Man, I'm going to have to link a lot of stuff in this one. Well, often kids from hard places through adoption and foster care come to us and believe people don't love me because I'm not worthy.
Yeah.
If I was worth something, people wouldn't treat me this way. Or this one, everyone leaves.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So if they believe that, they're going to act like they believe that.
And it's going to take a lot to convince them otherwise.
Right. It's not going to be a one and done.
Right.
You can't just say, well, in this house, we value life. Okay, done.
Nope.
Nope. It's going to be what we talked about before, was the repeated experiences over and over and over again to form that neural pathway in the brain. And the last one, which is the one that I hear about the most because it's the most visible, is behavior regulation.
Yeah.
So a child from hard places has difficulty regulating because he has not had the natural progression of regulation, where we regulate for the infant. We wrap the baby when he's cold. We wrap them in those blankets so they, the receiving blankets, we swaddle them so they can't move and they'll go to sleep. But they feel safe. They feel like they're in the womb.
And they're warm.
We change their diapers when they need change. We don't say, hey, newborn baby, do you need a diaper change? No. because they can't verbalize that. We just do it. They can't regulate. We regulate for them.
Right.
We feed them when they need to be fed. And then they move to a period of co-regulation. And what that looks like is usually a 2-year-old who gets the jug of orange juice out of the refrigerator and gets a cup and pours himself a cup, and half of it's on the counter. That child is beginning to co-regulate.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm thirsty. I need a drink. I'm going to get it myself. And then as the child moves into the teen years and adulthood, then they begin to self-regulate.
It's just a hard thing to let go of.
It's a really hard thing.
That's where I'm at right now.
Right. It's a very hard thing to let go of.
Like I told my son, just because he's 18 doesn't mean I can flip a switch and I'm done.
Right. They're ready to flip the switch and you're flipping it on and off.
That's right.
Wait, today I want you to be an adult, tomorrow I no.
No, not yet. I have to help you.
So with these kids that come from hard places, we have to go back and begin to regulate for them.
Yeah.
And say, okay, it's been 2 hours. They need to eat and drink. They're not going to do that for themselves. And then they move on to co-regulation.
Yeah.
And their self-regulation may come a lot later than their peers.
Right.
If you're thinking, okay, he's a teenager, he should be here, he should be doing this, then you're thinking about it wrong, because it's not going to happen that way. Why are you laughing, Lori?
Because I think I just had this discussion with you about my 13-year-old.
Why can't you act your age?
Why can't you act like a 13? What? That's what he said. How am I supposed to act my age? I've never been this age before. I'm like, oh, yep, you're right.
Right. And plus, because of the sensory processing disorder, he's not going to act his age.
He's not. It takes him longer. He still needs a little bit of help co-regulating.
Right. So there's a lot more information on being a child from a hard place, but we'll probably do some other podcasts on this. But I want to encourage you, if you have adopted or fostered, and Lori says even if you have a child with a capital letter syndrome like sensory processing disorder, Asperger's, autism, ADHD, ADD.
The information from ETC is really beneficial for anybody that works with children.
Right, and what we're talking about is empowered to connect, parent training. And I will link in the notes where you can find information about someone who does the training in your area. And I highly recommend that you take the training.
Yeah.
It's a 9-week course, and you will purchase many wonderful books that you get to do homework in, and you get to answer questions. But the most beneficial part is after you've done all the reading and answered all the questions, when you're in your training in the class, which is a 2-hour class once a week for 9 weeks, then your instructor will lead you through all of that material, and you will have an opportunity to discuss it with other parents who are on the same page you are.
Yes.
And that is so empowering to know you're not alone. You don't have to do this alone. You have a support system. And now that Lori's been through the training, then she can tell other people, this is how I benefited from it.
Yeah.
This is why you should take it. And it really is designed for foster and adoptive parents. But like Lori said, if you have a special needs child, these principles apply. We teach 25 different parenting tools. Because the thing is, with a child from a hard place, traditional parenting does not work with these kids at all. You have to learn a new way of looking at things. You have to learn a new way of doing things, and you have to reach them where they are, not where you want them to be.
Yeah.
You have to change your expectations.
Well, and I also think that, like, kids' church leaders and people that work with children, the information from the Empowered to Connect training really helps you to understand these children and where they're coming from. So what you do for a neurotypical child will not work for a child from a hard place.
Right. Exactly.
So the information is beyond beneficial for if you work with children, period, across the board. I mean, I know it's parent training, and I know that it's really centered on foster care and adoptive parents, but it is eye-opening for anywhere that you're working with children.
Right, and if you live locally, I will come and train. I've trained the local children's church workers and nursery workers here, and I've trained CASA workers. Anybody who works with children, this is beneficial. And like I said, I will definitely link it, and there's even a map on the page, so you can search your area. If you live in a different state, you can find, and there'll be an email address for that person, so you can email them and say, listen, I'm interested in training. It's kind of funny, one of my friends who lives in New York, somebody was looking for training in that area, and I suggested, Sandra, she lives here in New York and she's a trainer, and it turned out that they were very close to each other. In fact, they were going to the same church on the same day for an event. So yeah, there are people out there who have been trained and can help you, and you won't feel alone, and you can also learn some great tools. And
The toolbox.
Yes, a toolbox. You get a whole new toolbox.
Yep.
Metaphorically speaking.
I still have mine all on paper.
So thanks for joining us today. I hope that this was helpful. Please make sure that you like this podcast and share this podcast, especially share it with someone that you know it would benefit them to find out more information about what we're talking about. And go to thewholehouse.org. There's a whole bunch of articles about adoption and foster care on there, and check those out. And we're signing out.
Bye.
Bye.
We're so glad you could join us here for the Whole House podcast. Please subscribe, and if you give us a review, we might pick our favorite and send you a prize. Please remember to like the Whole House Facebook page and follow us on Instagram at _whole_house. And please sign up with your email on our website, thewholehouse.org, to be notified when new things are happening here at the Whole House. Thanks so much for listening.